Dr. Josh McGintry will be updating you on where we are with hemp production laws in Texas, which has had a lot happening in the past year. Dr. McGintry's an assistant professor and extension specialist with the Soil and Crop Sciences Department at Texas A&M. He provides leadership for extension programming and conducts applied research in field crops and forages for the Texas Gulf Coast and Lower Rio Grande Valley. I believe he's been at our Corpus Christi Center for more than 5 years now, and we're very lucky to have him. All right, Dr. McGintry, tell us what you know about hemp.
All right, thanks, Megan, and good morning to everybody. So, like Megan said, I'm giving more of a regulatory update or an update on the laws surrounding hemp. We're not going to talk so much about hemp production itself and agronomics. If you've been to any hemp programs in the last few months, that's been one of the big focuses. But now that we're at the point where we can actually legally grow hemp, we really need to zero in on the laws and what you need to do to get started if you're interested in this crop. So first off, just so that we're all on the same page, industrial hemp is Cannabis sativa. So that is the same species as the plant that we know as marijuana. However, marijuana is still illegal in the United States. What differentiates industrial hemp from what we call marijuana is the content of THC. That's the psychoactive compound in that plant. And so typically your strains of marijuana would have THC content that's fairly high, somewhere 3 to 15%. Actually, the legal definition that we're operating off of now is that anything over 0.3% is considered marijuana. And so your industrial hemps will have THC contents below that threshold. That's a very critical threshold because we have a plant that's legal to cultivate and produce in the US as long as it's under 0.3%. As soon as it crosses that line, it becomes marijuana. And that's going to be treated very, very differently in the United States. And so industrial hemp is not anything necessarily new. Okay, it's been a grain and a fiber crop going back many, many years. Of course, we haven't grown it in the United States in a long, long time, going back to World War II. But in other parts of the world, it's continued to be cultivated. But again, traditionally a grain and a fiber crop. Here recently, we've seen a big expansion into the CBD market or the cannabinoid market. And that's where most of the interest lies today. There's been CBD hemp grown in a few other states under pilot programs in the years prior to this. And most of the interest here in Texas from producers and from others that I visited with is mostly centered in on CBD, but we also have the grain and fiber markets to consider as we move forward and this crop matures in the U.S. So what brought us to today is kind of a cascade of events that have allowed us to now grow industrial hemp in Texas. So the 2018 Farm Bill is what really started to open that door up for us, removed industrial hemp from the list of controlled substances, and then allowed the states to then develop their own plans to regulate and develop hemp production in those states. Last summer, our governor signed House Bill 1325, and that kind of kick-started things in Texas to authorize production, manufacture, retail, sale, and inspection of industrial hemp. And then through the rest of the summer, fall, winter, there was a lot of back and forth between the Texas Department of Agriculture and USDA developing those rules. But here in March of this year, we finally got the final approval on those rules. TDA adopted those rules and has opened up the license portal. And so now we're at the point where if you go through the proper steps and pay the proper fees, you could legally grow industrial hemp in the state of Texas in 2020. And so we're now left with a lot of questions when it comes to actually growing. And like I said, I'm not going to spend much time on those aspects, but I do want to make sure everybody's aware that hemp is, it's an exciting new crop. Some folks are seeing some profit potential, but I want to caution a little bit because we don't know a whole lot about hemp in Texas. It's been a long time since anyone tried to grow hemp in this state. The last attempt that I'm aware of was actually in the 1930s. Small production was started down in the Rio Grande Valley. There was some issues down there that were kind of comical if you go back and read the newspaper stories at the time, but basically led to that crop being entirely destroyed and eventually banned by the governor in the state of Texas. So we don't really have any experience in this state to work off of. And from our aspect, from our point of view, from extension and research, we have essentially zero information to work off of other than what we've learned from other states. And so we're just starting from zero, just like everybody else in this industry, to learn about the crop. In 2020, we hope to start some research trials. We have some very basic things that need to be worked out and identified, like what variety works best in South Texas, right? What variety grows well in dryland West Texas? What about fiber varieties? What about your oilseed varieties? What about those for CBD? There's all these different markets, and we have all these different and diverse regions in the state. We need to put in place a pretty robust variety testing program to figure out what works best in what region for which market. And then a lot of just very, very basic agronomics that we have more or less figured out in other crops. We need to determine those things for hemp, like how many seed per acre are you going to plant for CBD? How many seed per acre for an oil seed crop, for a fiber crop? When should we plant? What's the optimal planting date? What's the right soil temperature? How much fertilizer to use? I mean, there's a lot of just very basic questions that we need to answer. So please understand, as we're starting to cultivate this crop in Texas, that we don't have a tremendous amount of recommendations to give just yet until we're able to work out some of those details on the research side of things. But like I said, we're not going to spend much time talking about that. I really want to focus in on the process to legally grow hemp in Texas. And so the number one thing, if you don't write down anything else, you need to write down this web address, because this is the resource that I go to find all of the information that I'm about to show you. And that's the TDA website for hemp. It's texasagriculture.gov/regulatory program/hemp. If you go to a search tool, like a Google, you can just type in Texas Department of Agriculture hemp, and it will take you to this page. It'll be one of the first results that come back. And so this is just a snapshot of that page. There's a lot of additional content below, but I just want to show you, I mean, just on that main hemp page on TDA's website, you've got a lot of things you need to pay attention to. First off, just underneath that little picture with the dominoes, you see a little green box right there. Okay, that's the link to the portal to apply for your hemp license, your grower's license, your lot permits, sampler licenses. There's a lot of things in that link. So that's where you're going to start to begin that application process. Underneath that, in red text, you see viewing hemp orientation video is required to apply. And we'll talk about that again later, but there is a short video that you have to go through, and I highly recommend that you do so because it has a lot of information, good information in it. You click that link to go to that video. Over on the right-hand side of that page, you can see TDA hemp plan. There's a link underneath that has the proposed rules. The most important link is actually below that. It says TDA hemp rules. And the blue text that says adopted rules, Texas Administrative Code. That is the final rules that we're operating under. You can click there and you can read through all of those rules verbatim. And then also at the very bottom of what you can see on this slide, you see a link for TDA approved hemp varieties. We'll circle back around to that, but you are limited to certain varieties that are approved by the Department of Agriculture. Those are what you can grow in Texas. And so you have to make sure that what you're intending to grow is on that list, and this is where you'll find that information. All right, the first step, if you want to become a hemp grower, is to obtain a producer license. So you at very minimum must have this, okay? You as an individual have to have a producer license. It's good for 1 year. It does not auto-renew. So if you're going to grow in 2021, you'll have to go through this again. It's non-transferable, So your license is your license alone. You can't transfer that to any other individual. You have to view that hemp orientation video before applying. One of the things you have to check in that application process is that you did indeed view that video. And you know, I had to watch that thing 3 or 4 times to get all of the information out of it. It's very information dense and there's a lot of good stuff in it. So please view that before you go through the process of applying. So the producer license is a $100 fee. It's a totally online application process. Like I said, you go to the TDA Hemp webpage, you click that link to begin that process. When you're applying for the producer license, you do have to specify at least one facility where hemp is going to be grown or stored. So the property where you're going to grow hemp, if you're a grower, you have to, at minimum, specify one facility. And we'll talk about the facilities and what that definition is here in a second. But you have to do that as you're going through the producer license application. You do have to be 18 years old. You have to pass a background check. Also, anyone who's going to be handling or transporting hemp has to also be licensed. It's not just for growers. Anybody that's going to be working with hemp has to be licensed. So here's the orientation video. If I remember correctly, this is about 25-30 minutes long. Okay. I would recommend having a notepad handy when you watch it. There's a lot of information there. I had to stop, rewind, replay that video several times to get everything out of it and onto my notepad. There's a lot of information there. Actually, the bulk of what I'm telling you today came straight from that video. So a lot of the basics of how you begin to legally grow hemp and go through all of the permits and fees, that's in that video. And then after you watch the video, you click the link on TDA's website and you go through a list of drop-down boxes and fillable fields to actually apply for the license. And this is just a snapshot of one section of that. And like I said, as you're applying for the license, you have to specify at least one facility where you're going to be growing or storing hemp. If you've got multiple properties where you might be working with hemp, you can apply for multiple facilities when you go and apply for that license. So the facilities are going to be basically, you know, any individual property where hemp may be grown or stored. Each facility is a $100 fee. So you've got $100 for your license application, and at minimum one facility in that process, that's going to be another $100 fee. You have to specify the address and give some GPS coordinates, not too hard to do. And important to note, if you need to go back in and change information on a facility that you've already established, it's a $500 fee. So please make sure the information is correct when you do it the first time. So you've got your producer license, you've registered a facility. There is one more step. Okay, you have to also obtain lot permits. Okay, so a lot would be a contiguous area in a facility, field, greenhouse, or indoor growing structure containing the same variety or strain of hemp. So if you are possibly going to grow multiple varieties of hemp, and that might be something we would try this first year, right, to start to identify what varieties work best on an individual farm. If you're going to do that and have multiple varieties, you're going to have multiple lots, and each lot will have its own permit. It's $100 per lot. So at minimum, if you're going to be growing hemp in 2020, you're looking at getting the license to grow, registering a facility, at least one, and then you're going to have at least one lot permit if you're just a single variety grower. So you're looking at about $300 in fees. Each additional facility is an additional $100. Each additional lot, so multiple varieties of hemp being grown on the farm, each of those will have its own lot permit and a $100 fee each. You can only apply for the lot permits after you've obtained your producer license, because to apply for that permit, you have to have a license number. You have to have a facility ID number. You also have to give the GPS coordinates of the facility and the lots, the size of the lot, so how many acres, how many square feet, whatever the size is. The method of propagation, is it direct seeded? Is it transplants? Are they clones? You need to provide the variety, the country of origin of that variety, and the company that you obtained it from. And then the anticipated dates of planting and harvest. Those all have to be provided when you apply for that lot permit. And it's all an online system. You go through that same portal on TDA's website where you get your producer license to go in and apply for these lot permits. So again, it's just drop down boxes, fillable fields, and then you pay your $100 fee per lot and move on. Okay, so assuming you made it through all of those steps, you got your license, your facilities registered, you have your lot permits for each lot of hemp. What about testing? This is going to be critical because like we said earlier, anything under 0.3% THC is perfectly legal to grow. As soon as it crosses that threshold, though, it becomes illegal in the United States. So testing is very, very critical. At this time, TDA does not provide testing for THC. So you as a grower would have to hire that out and have it conducted by a third-party sampler or lab. And you as a grower cannot take that sample. Okay, samples have to be taken by a third party, and that third party has to be licensed. And they have to go through a process very similar to what you have to do for a grower permit. They have to go through an orientation and apply for that sampler license. The lab, the testing lab, must be accredited in accordance with this standard and registered with DEA and TDA. Okay, so that's spelled out in the administrative code, the rules that you can see on TDA's website. However, a little bit of a caveat there. Temporarily, TDA and USDA have suspended the registration requirement with DEA. I'm guessing there's some additional details to work through there. So right now, the lab just needs to be approved by TDA and accredited in accordance with that ISO standard. I'm guessing at some point, though, as we move further on, we will need to verify that labs are registered with DEA. The list of approved labs, the last I looked, is not on the TDA website, but that should be made available very soon, especially as growers start to obtain their licenses. TDA will need to go ahead and put that information up there. So the testing, the sampling, all of that needs to be paid by the licensee. Again, TDA is not going to provide that. Need to be prepared to harvest the crop within 15 days of that sample being taken. So if you take your sample and big rains come, or whatever the case may be, personal issues, what have you, and harvest gets delayed for more than 15 days, you're going to have to pay somebody to come back in and resample and retest that crop. You have to harvest within 15 days. You can only harvest after the sample is collected. So you can't harvest the crop and then pay somebody to come in and sample the harvested material. They need to sample it from the field, then you can harvest. Each lot needs its own sample and test. There's some paperwork that has to go with those samples to transport them to the lab. The labs have 14 days to get back to you those results of the THC sampling. Now, you can sample your crop and then go ahead and harvest it before the test results come back, but you cannot move those harvested materials away from your facility until you get the test results back, and then TDA can issue you a transport manifest on that tested material. Now, let's say the test comes back above the 0.3% threshold. Okay, like we said, that's very important. It's a very important designation because then it becomes marijuana. Okay, and we have another set of rules to adhere to. So if it comes back above 0.3%, you can request a second test within 5 days of the first test. And that request is going to come from the grower. Okay. However, you have to retest the original sample. So that hot sample, or the sample that led to that hot test above 0.3%, you have to rerun the test on that same sample. You can't go out and take a new sample. And the retest has to be done by the original lab. So you can't then get a second opinion or a second test from a different lab. You got to rerun the original sample through the original lab. If that second test also comes back above 0.3%, it's now marijuana. The crop has to be destroyed. And there's some legal definitions of destroyed, but basically plowed under, mulch, composted, disked, mowed, chopped, buried, or burned. So basically a total loss at that point. One thing I'd also mention while we're talking about testing, I'm talking about the legal requirement for testing, which is that end of the season test just before you harvest. As we're starting to learn about growing hemp, and for most of us, it's going to be our first attempt at doing this, especially if you're in Texas. I would recommend maybe taking multiple samples through the year. Okay, it's not required, but it would be a good way to kind of orient yourself and learn more about THC content of the varieties that you're growing and how they change in response to environmental conditions and crop maturity. So it'd be a good idea to maybe take some periodic tests through the season just to look at what THC content is doing as we move through the year. And then, of course, the final test before harvest would be the one that TDA requires. Okay, a few other things. Producers responsible for controlling volunteer hemp for 3 years after the last hemp crop was harvested. So for a given field, if you grow hemp this year and then you put it back into, say, grain sorghum production or cotton production or corn, or pasture, whatever the case may be, if you go to another crop after that, you still have to monitor that field for 3 years and make sure that any volunteer hemp plants are being controlled. Another thing, pesticides. Pesticides are convenience items, okay? Weeds, insects, disease, pesticides offer us a convenient way to manage those issues. However, you need to understand that right now in the hemp world, there are very few pesticides registered. To my knowledge, there's about 11, I think, at this point, mostly biopesticides. So it's going to be a while before you see very many pesticides registered for use in hemp. And please understand that. Things like weed infestations, insect infestations become much more difficult to deal with when you don't have pesticides available for use. Okay, seeds and transplants. We mentioned this early on. Any of the propagules that you're going to use this year have to be of varieties that are approved by TDA. So your seed, your transplants, clones, what have you, have to be from the list of TDA approved varieties, and I'll show you that in a second. There's a lot of varieties on that list. As of April 1st, somewhere above 240 different varieties. And you can obtain that information from TDA's website. Transplants can be brought in from other states. However, you have to have a transport manifest issued by that state or territory, also a phytosanitary certificate. So we can get seed into the state of Texas, we can get transplants, but you have to have the appropriate paperwork, and it has to be of the varieties that TDA is approved. So this is the most recent list of varieties. There's a lot of materials on this list. It's just a list of variety names. It doesn't show you company names or company contact information, so it'll take a little bit of homework, a little bit of digging to obtain that information. But there's a lot of varieties on the list. I'm not sure, we just don't know much of anything about these varieties at this point. Hopefully in the coming seasons, AgriLife Extension and research will begin to build some data on these varieties and how they perform. So I think we're getting close on time. I just want to wrap up with some resources for you. First off would be TDA's website. We've talked about that a lot. That should be your first stop in the search for information on hemp. All things regulatory are there. Also, please view that orientation video. It's really worth your time. Next link is our Texas Row Crops newsletter. So we've put together what we call a hemp task force in Texas. It's made up of extension specialists and agents from all over the state. And those individuals have been very good about updating information on hemp as it becomes available and putting out press releases and newsletters in that Texas Row Crops newsletter. Dr. Calvin Trossel in Lubbock has been authoring most of those. And so you can go to that website, you can subscribe to the newsletter so that every time an update comes out, you'll get that in your email. And then we also have a website focused on hemp. It's agrilifeextension.tamu.edu/browse/hemp. Again, all the information that's coming from us in Extension will wind up on that website as well. And then lastly, my contact information here at Corpus. If you have any questions, feel free to give me a call or shoot me an email. So with that, my clock says we have about 2 or 3 minutes left for questions.
Yes, great job, Dr. McGintry. You did have one earlier about if hemp was going to become an insidious invasive plant like it's happened in other states. Do you have any comment about that possibility?
No, not at this time. We just don't know. I know I have some friends in Iowa that have shown me pictures of hemp growing in the bar ditches there from the 1920s was the last time they
Oh my
grew hemp.
gosh.
And it still persists in those bar ditches. So, the potential is there. I just don't know in Texas if it's going to become all that invasive. I suspect we'll find out in short order. But there's just no way of saying yet. We just don't know enough about hemp in this environment.
Also, there is a comment about a second test. You said a second test may be requested within 5 days of the first test. Does that say shall be requested within 5 days, or how long can the marijuana crop be left to dry until the THC content decreases to a legal limit?
Well, that's the tricky part. So the retest can be requested by the producer, but like I said, the retest is only going to be taken on the original sample that was taken from the field. So regardless of the THC content of the crop and how that might change as it matures or what have you, that's not going to impact the THC content of that original sample. So
Okay.
you can retest, but it's on the original sample and it has to be done by the original lab.
Okay, that's clear. Another comment was the ag code states that DPS may inspect a hemp crop and collect a sample, but then another section says that non-DPS law enforcement agencies may inspect, but no reference to collecting a sample. Why the difference?
That's a good question, and I am not aware of that discrepancy, so I really can't comment. I need to do a little more homework on that. I'll look that up. Thanks for bringing that up.
All right.
It's a new crop, and so there are going to be some little hangups here and there as we kind of work out the regulatory details. I suspect that's probably one of those
Okay. All right. And what about volunteer plants on neighboring properties?
The way the rules read, you're only responsible for volunteer plants on the piece of land where hemp was originally grown. So if seed moves off site, I don't believe that would be that producer's responsibility, but would still be a good idea for that individual to try to take care of any of that seed that moves.
Can you get crop insurance?
Yes. I know there's crop insurance out there to help, especially with hot crops, high THC crops that require destruction, but it's very, very expensive. Beyond that, I'm just not as up to date on what you can do with insurance at this point in time. I would recommend taking a look at that row crop newsletter or our AgriLife Extension Hemp website. There's been some updates there from Dr. Trossel on insurance. I'm not the best resource for that, though.